welcome to a new colouring video. Today I'm going to be trying out the Arteza Watercolor Pencils. So I've had these for quite a while and they were sent to me by Arteza, and I've only just swatched them out, just a few of them. When I first got them I swatched them out, but I haven't had a real go with them. So I'm going to do a colour along with them in the Creative Haven's Summer Scenes colouring book, because I thought, well, summer's nearly over and this is probably the last chance I'm going to get to actually colour some nice summer scenes. So first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm swatching all the colours out so I know exactly what range of colours that I've got and what they look like. There seems to be a lovely huge range of colours. Unfortunately there isn't a really dark blue. There is an indigo pencil and some dark blues, but they're not really dark enough for me. I like a real dark blue. And there doesn't seem to be a really light blue either. But that's not so much of a problem with them being water soluble, because obviously you can just use a little bit and then spread it out to make a paler blue. So as the Creative Haven paper isn't like proper watercolour paper, it's not going to produce the best results that it can, because you know, it's just ordinary paper. So I haven't used a primer either on the page because I just wanted to see how well they would work without using a primer. And as there's no print on the back of the Creative Haven page, it doesn't really matter if it bleeds through. Okay, so the colour along is going to be in real time. I'm just going to explain each little part as I'm doing it. I won't show the full colouring, I won't show like the repetitive bits, like obviously I'll show one strawberry, not like all the strawberries being coloured, just to keep the video to like a reasonable length of time, because like it'll take me hours and hours and hours to do this full picture because I'm so slow at colouring, and I'll be doing multiple layers as well with it being watercolour. So I'm going to try and keep it like maybe around and between 1 and 2 hours. Hopefully less if possible. Okay, so the page that I've decided to colour is this one with the cute bunny rabbit and strawberries. I'm just adding these clips to the side just to keep the pages down tight, but I ended up removing them because they were just getting in the way. And as the full page wasn't getting saturated, it wasn't really necessary. So I'm just starting off by lightly adding some blue pencil to the sky. Now I'm just laying it down really lightly. And I'm trying not to make like scribble lines with it, so as you can see I've got the pencil like kind of on its side, just to get a nice soft even covering, because the smoother you can get it down, the smoother it'll be when you actually add the water. So I'm applying it lightly to the bottom towards the horizon, and then as I'm getting further up to the top I'm making it a little bit heavier, because in reality when you look at the sky it's always lighter towards the horizon, so it'll give it a more of a realistic look. And I'm just doing it pale because it's the background and we just want it to fade into the background and make it look like it's far away in the background. So if you make your background colours more faded, they will actually look like they're further in the background. Okay, so now I'm adding some darker blue to the top of the sky, just to give like a gradient look, so it's darker at the top and lighter towards the horizon, as I said. So it doesn't really matter what colour blues you use. I think I'm using ultramarine for the lighter one and blueberry for the darker one. So if you do have the Arteza watercolours, I'll give the colours that I'm using, but if you don't have them and you're using some other watercolour pencils or even just ordinary pencils, you know, basically just a lighter blue and a darker blue. Okay, now I'm adding water to the sky. Now I'm using a nylon bristle brush, so it's quite stiff. It's not like a really soft watercolor brush. I think it's a brush that you can maybe use for acrylics or watercolor, but with watercolor pencils it's best to use a brush that's got some firmness to it, because if you use a really soft brush it's difficult to lift that colour off the paper. So I'm starting at the bottom and I'm working my way up, and the reason I'm doing it that way on is because that helps maintain that lightness at the horizon, because if I dragged the strong colour down it would darken the horizon, so it's best to, you know, work upwards for that area. Okay, so now the sky's finished. I'm using a jade colour, which is quite a desaturated green, for the trees in the background, because again we just want them pale, desaturated, they just need to fade into the background. So I just do one layer of the jade and then I dry that, and then on these trees that are a little bit nearer I'm adding a little bit of basil into that, so I'm adding a little bit more colour. I did the first layer of jade. I haven't actually wet it yet at this point, and like I said, just add that little bit of basil, because as things get closer to you they get more saturated with colour. Now I am going to add a little bit of shade into these trees in the background, but I need to dry that first with watercolor pencils. It's really difficult to go back in with another layer if the first layer is still wet. It needs to be absolutely bone dry, especially on this type of paper that hasn't got much tooth, because you'll find if your paper isn't completely dry the pencil just slips and you can't get any colour down. So also, if you're using a different brand of watercolor pencils and you want to use jade the same as mine, then your jade might not be the same colour, because the jade in this pack is like a really desaturated green, but jade is normally quite a bright colourful green, so I would double check that before you're actually using it. Okay, so now I'm applying the water to these rows of trees, and then I'll dry them with the hairdryer and make sure they're absolutely completely dry, and then I'll go on to add a little bit of shading. So you can see I'm applying the shading now, just kind of at the edges to kind of separate them a little bit, and then down at the bottom where the bottom of the trees meet the field. And then on the closer trees I'm just using the basil for a little bit of shading on those. I'm just kind of leaving the top right of the bushes or trees or wherever they are. I'm leaving them a little bit lighter just to give them a little bit of a three-dimensional look. And also you'll notice that I keep on going back for more and more water, because this is just kind of detail, I'm only actually wetting the very tip of the brush, so I need to keep going back for more. I don't want to flood it, because then you've got no control. If you flood it with water you lose all control. Okay, so now I'm onto the background fields, and again I don't want them to be absolutely bright green, kind of desaturated, but I also want them to be a different colour from the background trees. So stupidly I haven't wrote these colours down and I'm doing this voiceover afterwards, but I think this was like moss that I'm using. I'm trying to look at the pencil now. I think it's moss, but if it's not, it's like a mossy green colour. And then this is the absinthe green, so I'm using a lighter green to the top and a darker green to the bottom. I'm doing one field at a time, and I'm trying to make each field be slightly different colour from the next. I'm trying to make them more faint as they go backwards. This turned out not to be the best brush for this type of kind of flat work. It's okay for like tiny little bits, but later on I changed to a little angle brush and I found that a lot better. Just the point on this, it can cause streaks, so I had to be careful, but it was, if you can see here, I'm dragging the colour down. It was quite good for that, dragging the colour down to the bottom. Great for shading. If you're wondering what that noise is in the background, it's the cat. Nick! Hey! Stop it! Stop it! He's just cleaning himself. It's so annoying. Okay, so this near field here, you can see it's a lot brighter because I put more of that absinthe green, which is a lot more kind of like really bright. It's, you know, almost neon compared to the other greens, because that's the closest one. Now the back field is still a little bit too green. I want it more, I want it less saturated than that, I should say, and I did later on rub a little bit of that back out, just to, you know, just to send that back field into the distance a bit more. Okay, so now I'm onto the strawberries, and I started off with a layer of a more of an orangey red, and I think the one that I used was blood orange. And that was just for the first layer. And then so I wet, before I wet it, I add a more of a pinky red round the outsides for shading, and that was the rose red. So I'm trying to get like kind of a lighter patch kind of in the middle, kind of like to the top right middle. I'm leaving that orangey red, and then it's going to be like dark around the outsides. Okay, so now I'm just adding the water to that, so I'm trying to keep that lighter patch in the middle there, kind of top right middle. I don't have a lot of water on the brush. It's trial and error getting the right amount of water. Too much and it all just runs everywhere. Too little and it goes streaky and thick, and you need to keep dipping your brush back in the water. But you just like, after a few goes, you kind of work out how much water you need on the brush. So that's the first layer, so then I'll just go on do all the other strawberries with that first layer. And while those are drying, I'm adding the green to the leaves. I'm just trying to look at the pencil to see which colour green I used. I think it might be the absinthe green again. next time I do one of those, I'll write these colours down. And now I'm adding a different coloured green, kind of a darker green, to the little leaves on the strawberries. And again, I don't know which green it is, but it's pretty dark. Oh, I think it was the sage green. Okay, so now I'm just activating that colour on all those leaves, both the large leaves and the strawberry leaves. And then after that I'll dry them thoroughly with the hairdryer before moving on to the next layer. Okay, so this is what they'll look like so far. This is the first layer of the strawberries and the leaves, and it's completely dry, and I'm just checking the back page there, and you can see it hasn't seeped through, so it looks like these watercolor pencils are absolutely fine to use on even thin paper such as the Creative Haven paper. And if you want to get yourself a set of these watercolor pencils, I'll leave the link below, the Arteza affiliate link. If you are going to get them and you purchase them off the Arteza website, I'll get a small commission if you use my link, so I would really appreciate it if you would do that. If you are going to buy them, obviously I'm not trying to pressure you into buying them, I'm just saying if you are going to buy them, please use my link. And now I'm adding a little bit of shading to the outer perimeter of the strawberries, and I'm using purple iris. Now this isn't going down brilliant, this second layer. I don't know whether the strawberries weren't quite fully totally dry, or because the paper isn't so good, the tooth is already being kind of taken up with the first layer, so it's a bit harder to get that second layer down. Now I did try these on watercolor paper and I didn't have this problem, so it is just because the paper's smooth. So I went in with a darker purple, and I'm pretty sure it was the amethyst, and that works a little bit better around those edges, just to give that little bit of shading. And now I'm going in with the water and just activating that purple colour around the edges. I'm being very careful to try not to drag it into the middle, because I want to maintain that lighter area in the middle. It's a little bit tricky this stage, but it just takes a little bit of practice. Not too much water on the brush, go in at the edge and just kind of like fade it into the middle a little bit, you know, kind of blend it in. Okay, so after that was completely dry, I added even more red to make it more saturated. I didn't find it was saturated enough. It was actually quite nice. I could have just left it as it was, but for some reason when I was actually doing it I wanted it more saturated, so I'm using the rose red and I'm adding even more on top of that shading around the edges. Now I could have just left that as it was, dry, but I decided to go in with the water again and do another wet layer. But you don't actually always have to wet every single layer. With watercolor pencils you can use a combination of wet and dry, which I do later on in the picture. You'll see some areas I just colour in dry, especially like for shading. Sometimes it's really tricky to get a shaded layer over the top, especially on this paper, so sometimes I would just add some shading with just the pencil dry. So I hope you're enjoying this colour along. This is the first time I've kind of done a colour along video. I've done tutorials in the past, and I've done like mini tutorials as well. But somebody asked me in the comments, do I ever do colour alongs, and I kind of decided I would give it a go. Now this is edited, but I'll see how well this one goes, and if people like it I'll make more, and I'll maybe make it like more casual, like not as edited. But I feel like I have to edit it because the whole thing's so long. I have to take absolutely loads out, but maybe I should just do it in a more casual way. But I'll just wait and see how this one goes, and if people like it then it might evolve into a more casual kind of colour along. So I'm trying to work out what's the difference between a colour along and a tutorial, and I think there probably is a difference, because with a tutorial you're explaining exactly what you're doing in detail, but I suppose with a colour along wouldn't have to be that, so it would be actually easier if it was just kind of me colouring and kind of like just giving little hints of what I'm doing, just like saying what colours I'm using and stuff like that, without it being like in-depth absolute detail on exactly what I'm doing. Anyhow, let me know in the comments if you've got any suggestions or any preferences of what you would like to see me do, what type of videos you would like me to make. I could maybe try my hand at more of a kind of chatty video, although I'm not like really a chatty kind of person, but I'll probably run out of things to talk about, but I could give it a go. Okay, so now I'm adding a little bit of shading to these leaves, and I'm using I think I'm using the forest green for this one, which is quite a deep green. So I'm just basically adding it to the areas where I think would be shaded away from the sun. Okay, and now I'm just adding shading to the little leaves on the strawberries themselves. And then I do actually activate that with the water, but you could just leave it at that stage, just leave it dry. I mean, I don't have a huge amount of experience with watercolor pencils, but I'm learning as I go that it's sometimes easier, yeah, just to leave it dry, especially for the details. You don't like have to wet absolutely every bit that you put down. But I did go in and wet this. But another way to do it would be just to use the watercolor pencils as a base, just to get your base colour down so you can get like a nice smooth coverage, and then basically do the next layer and the details with coloured pencils. See, I'm actually trying to, you know, learn more about using watercolor pencils, so that's why I've done all the detail with them as well. But going forward, for colouring books, I might just use them for the base colours. And then here you can see that I do go back in with the dry pencil and add a little bit more darkness to those shaded areas with the dark green. Okay, so now onto these little flowers. When I coloured these, I didn't realise they were probably the flowers from the strawberries, and I coloured them purple, and I think they should be white, but too late now, I've already done them purple. I just thought there was just flowers mingled in with the strawberries, but obviously the strawberry flowers. Yeah, so I'm just using, I think, the amethyst, and I'm just colouring them purple. So do one layer with this colour, and then I just basically add some shading around the edges of that. You can see I've now moved on to another brush. This is kind of better for like little round areas such as petals, and it's a Zen by Royal and Langnickel, and it's a number 6. It doesn't actually say what type of brush it is, but it's like a kind of long filbert. I got it from a set of brushes, and I'll link it below anyhow. I'll link all the brushes below, and I'll obviously link the book, and I'll link the watercolor pencils as well. Now here I'm trying to add some shading, and I'm using the indigo. I think I'm pretty sure it was the indigo I used to add some shaded parts to these petals, because I did try the purple that I put down first, and I just couldn't get the shadowy areas dark enough. And I mean, even the indigo, I wanted them darker, but even that indigo wouldn't go as dark as I wanted it to. I've since, after doing this picture, been mixing some colours together to get like a dark colour that I wanted. And if I found that if you mix a bit of the indigo with a little bit of the, I think it was the cinnamon, it really knocked that colour down to a really dark blue. So if I'd have known that, that's what I would have done to get those dark shadows in these flowers. So for the middles of the flowers, I've coloured that little bit yellow, and I used the sunflower yellow, that little bit in the middle, not the very centre, but you can see which bit I've coloured yellow. And then I went round the very outside edge of that with a little bit of rose red. And then I just coloured the very centres in a black. And I didn't bother activating that either with water, I just left it as it was, because it was just too tiny, too small detail work to bother with the water. Okay, so now I'm moving on to the wall, and I'm using the elephant grey, and I'm colouring everything except for the bricks. And then I activate that with water and dry it off for the very first layer. And then when that was completely dry, I add some pewter, which is like a charcoaly kind of colour. Well, no, there is actual charcoal, but pewter is like a really dark grey. And then also some, I think it was either cocoa or espresso, they're both very similar, but it was a dark desaturated brown, and I just kind of mix those in randomly to just give kind of like a patchy look to that cement in the wall. And then I activated them just together at the same time and just kind of let it go as like patchy and uneven as possible. Okay, then once that was completely dried off with the hairdryer, I then coloured some little shaded areas onto these bricks on the top. I wanted it to look like the sun was kind of catching on the top of the wall, so I've left some like little highlighted parts. I'm pretty sure I'm using the pewter again here, and then I'm also adding some shading, extra shading to the wall. I just want some like dark patches to the underneath of like the bricks. And now I'm actually colouring the bricks, and I'm using a brown. I think it was either the it was just a dark brown, so either espresso or cocoa. And then once that was completely dry with the hairdryer, then I added some shadowing with the black pencil. I put the shadowing to the underneath of the top ledge of the wall, and then at the bottom, as the wall gets nearer to the grass, I put some shading in there, and then I also added some shading to the bottom of each of the bricks. Yeah, to the left hand side and the bottom, just to give them a three-dimensional look. Now onto the gate, and I used like a lighter brown. I think it was the coyote. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was. I'm looking at my chart now, my swatch chart, to try and work out what colour I used, and I think it's the coyote. So I'll just activate that with some water, completely dry it off with the hairdryer, and then just add a little bit of shading with a darker brown. I think it was the cocoa or cacao, however you pronounce it. Next I'm onto the grass in the foreground, and I've coloured a whole layer of the matcha green. I haven't activated it yet, and now I'm adding some jade green into the back. I'm just trying to send that grass kind of into the background, so it would be a little more bluer towards the background than the foreground. The foreground's always usually like warmer, so that's why I'm adding that colour just to the back area. Now I'm just adding the water just to activate that paint, and watching this back now, I'm like wishing that I used the little angle brush that I started using towards the end of the picture. It would have been so much better for this grassy area than that pointy nylon brush. Okay, so I've cut loads of that process out because it was just taking too long. But you can see it's a different colour grass towards the front end. And you can see I'm only using a tiny little bit of water just on the tip of the brush. And then once the grass was completely dry, I've then got a darker pencil. I've just got the moss here, and I'm just kind of making some grass-like marks, you know, just kind of some vertical lines, just to give the grass a little bit of texture. And then I go over that with the water and the paintbrush, and that pointy paintbrush was quite good for putting those streaky marks in as well. Okay, so now I've moved on to the rabbit, and I wanted to do a white rabbit, so I'm adding some shading here. I started off with the blue and also some of this sunflower yellow just to try and create some shading. It didn't end up working well at all. It just turned out really bad, and there was no going back at this point, so I decided just to make the rabbit brown. And this also turned out to be an absolute disaster. I just kept adding layers and layers of different coloured browns, trying to get it to look right, and I just couldn't get it right. I mean, it's kind of okay at this point. If I'd have just left it kind of like this, but I wanted to add some more depth to the colour because I thought that it was a little bit light at this stage. And look, you can see it just looks really streaky, so I then went back in with more water, and it just looked an absolute mess. So anyways, I did the eyes pink, and inside of the ears pink I ended up changing the eyes to black, and then now I'm lifting as much of the paint back off as I can, and I ended up finishing it off with Prismacolor pencils because I couldn't get any more watercolor pencil on there. The paper had gone really smooth because there was like quite a few layers on, and I'd ruined what little tooth there was in the paper. So like I say, I went back in with the Prismacolor pencils, and it ended up looking okay, but it wasn't really what I wanted it like. I just used different browns and also a black, and I just basically did tiny little strokes to kind of like build the colour and the shading up until I got it to where I was kind of satisfied with it. Now I'm moving on to these leaves to the left, the strawberry leaves, and I've laid down a light brown colour, which I think is the coyote, and the reason for this is because I need them to be a different colour to the grass, otherwise it's just all going to look one colour. So I did that, completely dried it, and then I'm adding a layer of like a darker green, I think it's jade, and then painted that over. It is kind of looking the same colour as the grass, and I did have to rectify it later on, but at this point I'm now adding some of this lime green to the highlighted parts, and I'm using this, I think it's jade, to add the shading like where the veins are. So it's starting to look a little bit darker than the grass now, but they did end up like, they didn't really stand out from the grass. But I will show you when I come to that part how I rectified the problem, and it made such a huge difference, and it was quite simple, it was quite easy to do. Now for these little grass parts that are sticking out in the foreground, I did a layer of lime, which is just like a really light green, and I dried that off, and then now I think I've got the jade, and I'm adding some shading just kind of to some parts of the blades of grass and to the bottom as well. And then as you can see, the colour just looks a little bit flat, and it kind of blends in. So then I ended up going over the whole thing with a layer of absinthe green, and it really brightened them and fetched them into the foreground, because the absinthe is such a really bright, vibrant green. But you'll see that a little bit later when I come to that part, and I'll point it out to you. Now these purple flowers that I did earlier, I decided to change a couple of them because just to give a little bit of variety. So I lifted out on 2 of them, there's 4 flowers in total, and 2 of them I lifted out as much of the colour as I could, and it just left those in a really light lilac colour, and then I went around the edges with the magenta pencil and just added a little bit of shading with the magenta. Now I'm on to these flowers at the right hand side, and I don't know what kind of flowers they are, but they looked a little bit like pansies, so I looked up some pictures of pansies on Google, and I don't think they are actually pansies, but I ended up just copying the colours from some actual pansies because there's lots of different colours. So this first one I'm doing, it's kind of like a white colour but with some little purple bits to the edge, and I used, for the outer edge, I used the lavender, and then towards the middle I used, I think it's purple iris. Yeah, purple iris. Then I used the sunflower yellow in the middle. Then for these tiny little stem pollen things, whatever they're called, I think they might be called stamens or something like that. Yeah, I just used an orange for those. And then for that little middle part, I used a purple for the outer ring, and then jet black for the very middle. And then also, if you can see, I've added some little bits of blue to the leaves just to try and add, sorry, not the leaves, the petals, just to try and add a little bit of shading on those white parts, because it was just looking a little bit flat. Now this second flower, I'm doing it in purple and yellow. Now purple and yellow are opposite each other on the colour wheel, so they go really well together. I did the outer edges in yellow, and you can see that I'm adding this, I think it's purple iris, so it's more of a pinky purple to the middle. I'm just doing like a light layer of that, and then you can see I'm scraping some out there just to give it a little bit of dimension to those petals. I added orange to the very middle, sorry, orange to the middle circle and black in the very center, and then I'm going back in with that purple iris colour, and I'm adding some little bit of shading to those petals and making it like darker in the middle as well with that purple iris. Now the blue flower, I'm just putting like a dark blue to the very edge, and then with the water I'm kind of blending that out towards the middle. And then as you can see, I'm making it a deeper blue to the middle. Once I've added water to that, I'm kind of lifting out a little bit just to give it a little bit of a highlight. And then in the very middle I'm adding yellow. Orange to the little stems. And orange and black to the very middle of that. Oh, and here you can see where I'm lifting out some of that blue in the middle, and it gives a nice highlight, and it gives a nice kind of 3D look to it. At this point I've moved on to that angle brush as well that I was talking about earlier, which I found so much easier to use, and I wish that I'd used it from the beginning. But the pointy nylon one was good for some areas, and the filbert one was also good, so I did kind of need all three brushes, but I just hadn't used them for the right areas. Then this last flower to the bottom, I used magenta, and I made it kind of stronger as it went towards that edge line, and a little bit more faded as it goes towards the middle. That's what I attempted to do. For that little middle piece I coloured in purple. Then you can see me here adding some of the blue, which is the periwinkle, to the just to some of the edges to give it a little bit of shading, and then I think, yeah, I put yellow in the very middle and yellow on the little stamen pollen things. For the butterflies, I used magenta towards the very middle, and then I added the yellow, which was the sunflower yellow, I think, for most of the rest of the coloured parts, and then I just finished them off with some black. Now when I added the water, I started off with the yellow and worked it towards the magenta. So I wet all the yellow first, then I wet the magenta and kind of just blended it a little bit into the yellow. If I'd have wet the magenta first and did it the other way on, I would have ended up turning the whole thing pink. So that's why I did it in that order. Okay, so this is where I'm adding the absinthe green that I was talking about earlier, and it really brightened the grass blades up. And then just for the final finishing touches, I used this eggplant pencil to add a little bit of shading to the strawberries underneath where the strawberry leaves were. And then I also added a little bit of shading in the little delves where the seeds go, just little bits here and there. Then with the white gel pen, I added a few little dots of highlights just to those strawberries, and then also the eye of the rabbit, which really finished the rabbit off. I added some black to the rabbit's nose and another little highlight on that to make it look a little bit shiny. I think that really finished the rabbit off, but I still wasn't happy with those leaves to the left, so what I did was I added even more dark green to the shaded areas just to make them even darker, and I also added more dark green to the bases of the blades of grass, and I still wasn't entirely happy with it, so I ended up lifting out some of the colour around those, the grass colour. So I was just wetting it with the brush, dabbing it with the tissue and lifting some of that colour out, and it made such a massive difference. It made the rabbit's face and the leaves stand out a lot more against the background. So I just thought that worked quite well. Okay, so that's the finished picture. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have and you want me to do more of these types of videos, please let me know in the comments. Hopefully I'll get better at them if I do even more. Everything I've used is listed in the description below, and I've put Amazon links, affiliate links, so if you're going to buy any of this stuff, please use my links. It will be a great help, helps me buy more equipment and art supplies for the channel. And thank you very much for watching.